We're now going to learn a recipe for quick mozzarella. It's also known as 30-minute mozzarella or easy, super easy mozzarella. It's a fun recipe. It's really popular. It's what you get if you see those boxes, those cheese-making packages for sale, often at cheese shops. Those are often selling you the quick mozzarella supplies and recipe. I'm here today to teach you how to make that cheese and show you how fun it is, but I'm also here to show you some of the loopholes because this is a tiny bit of a finicky cheese. The first most important thing is that you use the right milk. Today I'm going to do 1 gallon worth of quick mozzarella, and I'm going to use 2 different milks which get my approval. The first is, this is organic, doesn't have to be organic, but unhomogenized. That means milk that has a cream line at the top. You can find it, but it's not available in every area of the United States. It's definitely available in San Francisco. We're very milk rich. But if you can't find it, then your other option for having 100% success on this quick mozzarella recipe is to try and find raw milk. Now, raw milk is political. People have a lot of issues with it, but the idea behind using raw milk is that if you want to pasteurize it, you can pasteurize it, but you're going to pasteurize it at the lowest possible temperature so that it still works for your recipe. If you have raw milk and you want to pasteurize it, you simply need to heat it up and hold it at 145 for 30 minutes. That is a form of pasteurization. If you don't want to pasteurize it because you believe in raw milk and you trust your milk source, that's also an option. The take-home message is that you want to find a milk that is unhomogenized and minimally pasteurized. You also want to choose a milk that is as fresh as possible. You don't want to use powdered milk. You don't want to use ultra-pasteurized milk. You don't want to use homogenized milk. Now that's a lot of words. I would basically say find the fanciest, nicest, freshest, least manipulated milk in your area, and that's your best shot for making this quick mozzarella work. Once you find the right milk, you are good to go. It's going to work for you, and you're going to be so overjoyed to realize that in 30 short minutes, you can turn a gallon of milk into a ball of beautiful, sweet, milky, just stretched mozzarella. Okay, let's get going. A gallon of milk goes into the pot. Remember, I always try and pour my milk gently. While the milk is still cold, I'm going to acidify the milk, meaning bring its pH from about 6.8, drop it down to about 5.3 by using 1.5 teaspoons of citric acid crystals. You can find these online. You can also find them at hardware stores that sell canning supplies, jelly and jam making supplies. It's basically granules of lemon juice. To that citric acid, I want to make sure that I add some water and then stir it. I'm adding about 1/4 cup of water. The amount is not so important, but I want to stir it sufficiently that all those granules are completely dissolved. That's really important. So the first most important thing for success with 30-minute mozzarella is find good milk. Unhomogenized, very fresh, minimally pasteurized milk. The next step to success is make sure Those citric acid crystals are totally dissolved. Alternatively, you can also do this with white vinegar. If you don't have citric acid crystals, you can use the equivalent of 3/4 of a cup of white vinegar. So I know the citric acid crystals are dissolved because I can hear there's nothing scratching granular at the bottom. Okay, good. I need to get the acid into the milk when the milk is still cold. I can feel that it's still cold, and 46 degrees is still cold. So while stirring, I'm going to add my acid. Then I'm going to turn on the heat, and I'm going to bring it up to 90 degrees. I like to stir gently. Don't whisk the milk. Don't walk away from it. I'm heating it up on hot. You could heat it up on a less hot temperature. I'm just trying to make it a true 30-minute mozzarella. While the milk is heating, I'm going to go ahead and put a teapot. I'm going to go ahead and put a teapot on the fire, on the stove, to start to heat a little bit of water. This water I'm going to use as the stretching water. We're here at 89 degrees, 90, turning off the heat. Oops, popped up to 91. I'm not going to worry about it. The next step is to add the rennet. Rennet is this special enzyme you find on the cheese supply, online, or you find it from cheese supply companies. I'm going to add just 1/4 teaspoon. I like to measure with my handy dandy medicine dropper. So measuring 1/4 teaspoon. Into the milk it goes. I stir it in quickly. And then I stop the movement of the milk. I want it to be as still as possible. Those little floaties, those little clumps of cheese that you're seeing at the top, that's fine. I'd expect that. Also, those little yellower specks, let's see if you can see one. There, they're really subtle. That's just the butter fat. You see that because the milk was unhomogenized. All right, the rennet went in, I stirred it in, I stopped the motion of the milk. Now I'm going to watch the clock and I'm going to wait 3 minutes. Okay, 3 minutes has passed. I'm going to go back and check the curd. I'm hoping it's no longer milk, but now a milk gel. Let's see. Cool. Can you see that? Definitely not liquid milk. You can barely see the imprint of my hand. I love this. I love this phase of cheese making. What I want to do now is cut the curd, and I want to cut it into about 1-inch wide columns. You can cut this curd just using a good old kitchen knife. It's not that important. I cut in one direction, then I turn 90 degrees and I cut the other direction. Almost instantly, I can start to see that the pot is changing. It was a gel, but as soon as I cut it, the process of syneresis started to happen. The whey inside the gel is being expelled, pushed out to where the cut lines are, because that's where the pressure is less. Look at that. It's changing so fast. After I cut it, I often like to wait that 1-minute healing period before I start to make my horizontal cuts. Now, how do I make my horizontal cuts? I make them very gently. And something to note is that unlike the cheddar jack, the curds in my quick mozzarella, they're just a little bit more fragile. They aren't going to have quite the same integrity. So as I stir, it's going to look a little bit like scrambled eggs and a little bit less like distinct cubes floating around in liquid. Here's how I make my horizontal cuts. But first of all, pretty cool, right? I make my horizontal cuts by sliding the skimmer horizontally and then just gently pulling the curds out of their place. So I'm essentially cutting, lifting, shifting. That would be a more accurate description than actually stirring. I'll be stirring eventually, just not yet. I do this for 5 minutes in order to break down all the curds, and what I'm trying to do is get to the point when I can stir. So 5 minutes of this. As larger curds come up from the bottom, I just cut them using the side of my stirrer. Actually, it's only been 4 minutes, but I can start stirring at this point. I feel that none of the gel is connected to the bottom. It's all sort of in motion. Now is the point when I turn on the heat. My goal is to raise the temperature of the vat 5 degrees, so up to 95, over the course of 10 minutes. I set the heat to low. 10 minutes has passed, and my vat of curds is now 95 degrees. The curds look quite different. As you can see, they firmed up quite a bit. They seem more like popcorn floating around in whey, whereas before they seemed like silken tofu blobs. Can you see that? This is because the cooking and the stirring dehydrated the curd and shrunk it down. That's what I want. At this point, I'm now ready to pitch the curds or drain them. Generally, I'm always telling you to put a piece of cheesecloth over your colander, but I happen to know with the size of curds in this recipe that I can get away with a fine mesh colander all by itself. Here the curds are freshly made, draining. I like to let them drain for about 10 minutes, and halfway through that time, I like to flip them. Could probably flip them a little bit earlier, but the more they drain, the easier they'll be to flip. Meanwhile, I can continue to heat my teapot of water, or if I wanted to, I really actually could use this hot whey, which I just drained off, as the water that I'm going to use to stretch the cheese. I want to have the temperature of the stretching water, or in this case the stretching whey, be between 165 and 185 degrees. That's very hot. If you have heat-sensitive hands, I recommend that you use those blue neoprene gloves that you see people use for different kitchen crafts. Those will enable you to not be worried about the temperature of the water at all. I have stretched cheese, stretched mozzarella for many years, and unfortunately don't have many nerve endings in my fingertips. So to me, I don't need the neoprene gloves, and I actually quite like having the tactile feel of mozzarella directly in my fingertips. You can make your choice. I think that probably starting off being more careful would be better, and then as you grow more accustomed to how the cheese should be moving, then you could let the gloves go. Or you could be extra macho and just start off with plunging your hands on your first run into very hot water. So now I'm going to go ahead, it's been 5 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and flip these curds. Whoa, it's like a big warm cheese blob. That's fun. You can hear it draining. Remember, this is 1 gallon worth of milk. It's going to yield me just under a pound of cheese. I've let the mozzarella curd drain for about 10 minutes. I gave it a flip halfway through. We're ready to move on and finish this recipe. First, I'm going to check the temperature of my stretching water. It's at 160, so it just needs a few degrees more. In the meantime, while it heats, I'm going to take this blob out, plop it on a cutting board. This is definitely a good thing to have on hand if you want to do a gag on your friends. They'll have no idea what warm, blobby thing has been placed on their desk. I'm going to go ahead and cut this into strips. It's really juicy. So I put a towel underneath the board. I'll stop there. Oops. Okay. My drained strips. The size of the strip is not super important, but why don't we say somewhere between finger and carrot sized. The temperature of the water is in the range of 165 to 185. 168, perfect. The last thing I'm going to do is go ahead and move some of this hot water so that I completely cover those strips of drained curd. And I'm going to add to this 2 cups or so, let's see how many cups. I'm going to add a substantial amount of salt. I'm going to add half this, so that's about 2 tablespoons. The idea is that you want the cheese to be plenty salty. You can add the salt to the stretching water, or you can actually add it as you're stretching the ball. It's up to you. So I've just put hot water and salt over the strips. I'm going to give a little bit of a stir to make sure that the strips get heat on all sides. And I'm going to wait a good minute. I don't want to jump the gun and try and stretch the cheese before it's time. If I do that, it won't really stretch. If I wait a proper amount of time, the cheese truly will soften and become stretchable. Nearby, I have a bowl of cold water because as soon as I'm done stretching the cheese, I have to put it somewhere that can help hold its shape. If I just put it on a plate on the table, the cheese, because it's sort of like a liquid, will just blob out. If I put it in water, the water will help it retain its shape of being a ball. So as the cheese is in hot water, what I'm going to do is kind of go through, can feel that the cheese is changing. It wants to flow. It wants to stretch. That's a good sign. That's what I want. If your cheese is completely not stretching, my first guess is that you need to use a different brand of milk. My second guess is maybe you didn't measure the amount of citric acid crystals correctly. So go back and double check those steps. My third guess is you didn't give it enough time in hot enough water. But my water is definitely hot. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of going through, pulling, flattening, pulling. I'm being gentle. I'm really letting the cheese do what it wants to do more than forcing it. I'm going through pulling, and it's going right back into the hot water. If I want, at this point, I can do a little salt test. It's not too salty. I'm going to add a little bit more. Just do that one more time, going through, pulling. This is a really fun way to work with cheese. A really amazing transformation of liquid milk to long, elastic strips of milk proteins. When I've gone through and have a sense that most things are flattened and pulled, which is what I'm doing now, maybe I'll get one last boost of hot water. One last boost of hot water. During the stretching, if the cheese starts to become less elastic, check your water temperature. You might find it's cooled off. Just change it out, get more hot water. All right, friends, the golden moment. I'm going to show you how to stretch a ball, and I'll do it in maybe about a bocconcini size. So here's my blob of stretched out ribbons. I'm going to start to just sort of tuck those loose ends around so that it forms a more compact blob. Also what's happening, you can see, is this shiny, beautiful outer skin is forming. And here's how I make a ball. I'm pressing up so that I can get my hand around, and I'm tightening my thumb, my forefinger, and I'm pinching and ripping off that just finished, I'd call that an ovalini, goes right into the cold water. So I could make another ovalini, but I'll show you quickly how to make a rope, a braid. So get to that rough ball phase, but instead of finishing it as a ball, start to open it as a rope, as a donut. I'm going to give myself a little bit more hot water. I just finished this ovalini. Look at that. And I'm going to go back and finish this rope. Ooh, it's definitely hot and ready. If the cheese is stretching too rapidly, you can actually slow the process down by dropping it into cold water, which is what I'm doing now. It got a little bit too melty, if you know what I mean. So that, repeating, I took a rough ball shape, not a finished ball shape, poked a hole in the middle, opened it up as a donut. It was stretching too quickly, so I dropped it over here into some cold water. Okay, now I have a really lanky piece of cheese, and what I want to do to make a really beautiful presentation is I think I'm going to double it up because it's so lanky. And I'll start with this sized loop. What I want to do is twist it so that I create some tension. This is exactly like if you like to knit. When you make a skein, you want the tension of the twist to twist back in on itself. Check that out. A little bit messy, so be prepared. If I want to serve this, I really don't have to do much. I like to put this on a plate, add a little bit of garnish, drizzle with some olive oil, and call my friends over for dinner. Okay. So I've stretched all that mozzarella. I'm just going to add a few more to this plate. They're so fresh. I mean, they're really still warm. Some people love to eat it that way. Some people like to let it cool a little bit. If you want, you can slice it up and it just looks so beautiful. Black pepper, drizzle of balsamic, some basil leaves. You'll be the life of the party. I'd now like to show you one more step you can take in the mozzarella making process, where we turn mozzarella into burrata. Burrata is the most decadent of cheeses. It's essentially a cream-stuffed mozzarella purse. Watch. First, I make a crude rope like I was making to make my braid. But instead of stopping here, what I want to do is tease this rope open so that I get a lot of shreds. I'm going to make a pile of shreds in the bowl right here. The finer that I make these shreds, the more decadent the burrata is going to be. So this shred, which is quite fine, is going to be more delicious than this shred. So be as neurotic as you want. The finer the shreds, the more decadent the burrata. Once I've got enough shreds, in this case, about a quarter cup, I'm going to add a pinch of salt. And then I'm going to cover those shreds with heavy cream. This is the middle of my burrata, which I call stracciatella. I'm going to mix this. What I want is that the shreds start to not homogenize with the filling, but mix it enough that it becomes a little thicker. Sometimes what I like to do at this point is stir in a little bit of ricotta so that it has a little bit more body. Let me go get some ricotta. You may remember when I made ricotta with you. Here's that ricotta. It's super beautiful. I'd like to eat it just like this. But when I'm making my filling for my burrata, to thicken up the filling, if I want, I can take just a little bit of that ricotta to thicken up the filling. That's because filling a big tortilla of hot mozzarella with liquid cream is a little tough. It's going to want to seep out the sides. If I thicken it up a little, like this, you can see it makes it just a little bit easier. This is looking super delicious to me. Check that out. All right, the filling's ready. Now let me make the exterior. Now we're going to put the burrata together. We have the stracciatella, delicious, thick threads of freshly stretched mozzarella with some heavy cream, a little ricotta, some salt. And I've got over here a sheet of melted, ready to go mozzarella. I could make that into a ball or a rope, but instead I want to make it into burrata. And here's how I do it. I open it up like a pancake or tortilla. And when it's open enough, oops, don't let it grow too fast. Much like when you play with pizza dough, you don't want the little patches to become so thin that they bust open. So I make a little bit of a pouch. You can use a bowl or a cup to do this. I often just do it with my hands. Into that pouch goes this luscious cream. And then working quickly, I pull those edges up and I want to seal it, capturing the contents within, sealing it so that I essentially have a pouch of luscious stuffed cheese. I'll make that again. A pancake opens up. If I want extra juice, I call it juice, I can pour it in, add some threads. The edges come up. You can see it's a little bit tricky. Then while that cheese is still hot, I hold it closed. If I wanted to, I could take a little cord and wrap it around like a cute little knot to hold the bag closed, or I could also just tear it off. There you have some beautiful fresh burrata. Oh, delicious. Well, friends, there we have a gallon of milk turned into beautiful, abundant, freshly stretched mozzarella in under an hour. I can't say it was 30 minutes, but it was pretty fast. Mozzarella rope, bocconcini, ovalini, slices with fresh tomato, balsamic, pepper, olive oil, fresh bread, and then oozing burrata. Doesn't get any better. That is when the cheesemaker has a vat of warm milk. First we put the cultures in, then we put secondary cultures in, which in this case are mold spores called Penicillium candidum. And Penicillium candidum is that characteristic fluffy, spongy, white mold that you find on the rind of a camembert.